Hello and welcome to my presentation. I am Sean Godoy. I am Director and Founder of Diversity Property Solutions, and I'm also co-founder of the SA Proptech Association as well as the Proptech Africa Umbrella Association. Just a little bit about my background. I am a property professional. I studied property studies degree at WITS. And graduated and spent a number of years in corporate in South Africa and London as a market analyst and research consultant, looking at market trends and obviously market dynamics and fundamentals, and basically understanding how markets how they work and what makes them tick. During my time in London, I got exposed to Proptech through one of the companies I worked for, who was involved with Europe's first Proptech accelerator, Pi Labs. So I got exposed to a really exciting activity there. And then upon returning to South Africa in 2017, when I founded Diversity Property Solutions, I continued my interest continued, and I met some like-minded individuals, which led to us founding SA Proptech. So I do a variety of things. So my consultancy business obviously leverages on my experience, so market analysis, strategy, site feasibilities, etc. I'm also involved in a lot of training and skills development through online, through workshops, which this year have been online, but will hopefully return to also face-to-face in the coming months. And linked to my interest in PropTech and general innovation in the property industry, I also offer strategy and innovation consulting for the property industry, various role players, as well as the tech companies or startups that may be entering the area of innovation and property. So that brings us to my session today. I'm not going to use a presentation. I thought we could just have a discussion, and I'll try to keep it fairly short. I believe there's such a thing as video or Zoom fatigue, and especially because it's just me presenting. Don't want you to get too bored of my face. So I'd like to keep it short and snappy and speak to something I'm actually really passionate about, and obviously very much linked to BIM. And which is why I've been fortunate enough to be asked to speak at the BIM R&B, which is fantastic, just a really, really great organization. I've done one or two things with BIM Community Africa, and it's a fantastic organization. So I commend everyone involved, and yes, really excited to be a part of such a great event. So well done to everyone. So the topic of my discussion is BIM and PropTech, understanding the synergy and opportunity. So to start off, I will provide just a general, perhaps introduction of what PropTech is, which is actually an evolving term like many of these tech buzzwords, like fintech, etc. So PropTech is basically property and technology, and it's any intervention or innovation or product or service that uses technology. This is in its simplest form, uses technology to change or improve the way something is done within the property industry's value chain. So that's from transactions to management to investments, etc. And it's an evolving term in a lot of ways. So some recent research out of Said Business School from Professor Andrew Baum and his team, who have released some of the sort of most respected research on PropTech and innovation. Their latest reports actually describes PropTech, or they say it's evolved to more of a mindset, and also it's also a mindset of innovation that has taken, that is fairly firmly rooted in other industries like finance and banking, which property has lagged the banking industry a bit, but yet they're very similar traditional businesses that perhaps are slow to change. But banking, if you're a bank that didn't innovate or change, then you wouldn't probably be around anymore. So that's quite an interesting way to look at it, because when things started, Proptech, it was important to obviously give a name to it, and various associations and research and etc. started coming about, which is fantastic. But it is part of a wider drive for innovation within the real estate property industries across the globe, and it's taking roots. There's still a lot of opportunity and a lot of work to be done, but there's some fantastic activity that really shows the sort of the value case, or proves the sort of cost benefit analysis. There's real practical examples where a Proptech solution has really increased efficiency in terms of management, increased return for landlords, etc. All the key fundamentals of how the property industry ticks. So that's really the backdrop. And within, if you looked at Proptech, there's sort of three key ways. This draws on the initial report from Professor Andrew Baum and his team at Saïd Business School in Oxford, which was Proptech 3.0. So the first one is around cutting out the middleman, which always just feels like a bit of a sort of perhaps a negative term, I think. But it's putting consumers and the sellers or providers of services in contact and letting them transact, like Airbnb does with short-term rentals. But that's really part of the overall transaction section of the value chain for property, which is a very, very important one. And specifically, across the board, but also in residential, you've got high volumes of transactions, and there's been a need, and there still is, for increase in efficiencies, reduction of costs, perhaps better service products for the consumer, etc. Cost savings for both sides of the party. So there's a lot of Proptech platforms that facilitate sales and lettings across residential through to commercial, which is quite exciting. In South Africa, this is weighted towards residential, which is a global trend, but there's some very exciting commercial activity taking place. And this also goes for East and West Africa, particularly West Africa, arguably, I think, overtaking South Africa's Proptech scene. Some very, very diverse, interesting Proptechs there. But again, lots of focused on inefficiencies or improving services in the residential industry in terms of those transactions. Next is how we manage space, which is where BIM would come in. So platforms, smart building technology, AI, data-driven platforms or services that help us manage buildings more efficiently, with certain remote aspects, and adding efficiencies on a portfolio basis, which is important for a lot of landlords and asset managers. So, this can range from the original Proptech, I like to call it, is property management software, which can make your processes more efficient. I mean, it's a very admin-intensive process, property management. So again, lots of room for improved efficiencies, usability, increased efficiency and the linked cost savings. Sorry, and then also it's now morphed, especially in smart buildings, is interesting. Automated buildings, sensor-driven data, etc. Reactive buildings, predictive maintenance systems, etc. If you've got a lot of data feeding into IoT and perhaps AI on the next level, you can get some very interesting things that are changing, obviously, what was a very analog process of managing a building or a portfolio. So yeah, there's a lot involved in that, obviously, how we manage our properties. And next is how we use our properties, which isn't always tech-driven, which is interesting. So that's why I think it's a conversation about innovation. That's Proptech more and more means innovation. So this is mostly in terms of flexible space, shared space, which has obviously firmly taken hold in the office sector in terms of co-working, etc. And is now there's really exciting things happening in retail, industrial, even residential, restaurant scene, etc. You have basically shared space that's on demand, which is what we want. Like we watch TV. We no longer just want to. This is what there is, and this is the times, and you can watch these channels. We want everything on demand, and also in terms of a business sense. As an office occupier, user of logistics, warehouse space, a retailer, flexibility is becoming more and more important in our business environments that are rapidly changing and can be volatile. I mean, this year is quite an extreme case and something relatively unprecedented that has come in and really shook things up. But it's funny how it's a lot of trends that were already happening, like remote working or online retail, etc. They in a lot of times they got a boost because we had the ways of doing things remotely or online. But there are also trends that were there already that landlords, that retailers, etc. had to think about. So a lot of that is just it's the shared space. It's a lot more efficient. You end up with lots of vacancies in cities, etc. So you can kind of break the space up. You can offer it on from 1 hour to 1 month. Flexible terms. The space itself, perhaps you can expand and contract in terms of like an office environment. You might be an online retailer that needs warehouse space for a few weeks to facilitate the shipment and delivery. So logistics, very exciting. Lots happening there. Also high tech warehouse space. If you look at how Amazon's warehouses operate, that's quite interesting. Lots of automation and technology at play. And then the restaurant scene, purely takeaway restaurants that just want they just want a restaurant, on a short term, a kitchen space on short term lease to deliver what they want. So you might get a warehouse that has 10 kitchens in it and various takeaway companies, perhaps catering companies, etc. Also test kitchens and that type of thing for food manufacturers or for restaurateurs. So that's very interesting. And there's shared retail space. There's companies that will take a shop in a mall, and say you have a product a business that wants to sell a product, they will actually give you a shelf space, etc., display space in this shop with branding, etc. They facilitate that process. So it's basically a shared retail space, which has happened in different ways before, but again with some technology, it kind of makes the process quite slick and interesting. So it's just a shared space, driven by the need for flexibility, basically, in our changing personal and business lives, which is quite exciting. So those are the three key themes for Proptech and innovation in property. And bringing it back, obviously, to BIM, it's basically the management and use of the space. This is where BIM would be really interesting, because as I mentioned, in terms of the management of the space, smart buildings technology, it basically is, digitizing parts of the operation plus the sort of the recording and monitoring of data. And obviously, if you have a digital BIM model, it's probably the best foundation possible, because that building is mapped. You could link sensors, etc., to like a digital map of this building, 3D, which is fantastic. You could link that to occupancy data within a 3D model, by tracking movements of people, flows, etc. It's really quite exciting. BIM, it's something I've learned about this year, probably. I'm by no means an expert, but having digital twin for actual property, it gives this foundation for basically digital plugins and also data creation, all important data, which, as with any tech trend or initiative or product, data is the sort of lifeblood of that, and that's why data is the new gold. So it's something the property industry, I don't think, has harnessed as well as it could. There's a lot of sort of dead data sitting, through property management software companies, etc. They've for decades they've been collecting this data, and it's there. But there's existing systems, like I said, about clever property management platforms that will use this data. But I think if you marry it with BIM, it provides like the perfect foundation, like I said, because you're trying to put perhaps digital elements into a building in terms of automation, monitoring. And if you've got this digital twin, this digital map of this building, it really just provides a whole host of new opportunities, which I think is really exciting. It could be compared within the sort of property industry, and this is within transactions. I'm quite excited about digital deed registries. So it's an example of a very analog, clunky system that's mostly, in most countries, massively inefficient. It slows down transaction processes. It can be difficult to access data, etc. And basically, this slows down the all-important sort of research and transaction processes for the property industry, for investors, for developers. So, it's not like if you're trading equities, something happens in the markets. Obviously, you buy, you sell, you release more shares. It's instantaneous, relatively. In the property industry, it's not. You plan a development for years, then there could be an economic crash. There could be a shift in consumer demand. You could have physical impediments that come up from the site or in infrastructure. So when you've got delays in terms of the transaction taking place, or even the planning permission, which is also linked to this process, it just makes things very difficult, which is why specifically property development is such a high risk process. So if you had a digital deed registry, which was efficient, accessible, and had a lot more functionality, you could just imagine the boost to traditional transactions in the industry. Plus, a digital deed registry would provide, like BIM does for operating a building, it provides this this wealth of data and a digital platform, which will, first of all, increase efficiency in the industry and add lots of functionality from the provider, who would generally be the state. But also, it provides this foundation, this hotbed for new Proptech, basically providers, service providers, and product to come into the market and leverage off this digital platform that basically is where the property industry operates, through increased data and digital processes, basically. So again, it's like the lifeblood of the industry. And a lot of times, which is probably what banking can still be like, and was definitely, perhaps not so long ago, in the last decade or two, there were digital things happening, but the banks were very analog. And I think there's, like, in terms of payment technology in America, I think that's a good example, because it's interesting when I traveled there how different the payment technology is. I was a few years ago. I'm sure things have changed, but they would take your credit card away from the table to process it, and then the charge takes place at a later stage, which is very interesting, especially for South African. You're not quite going to give up your card and then trust them to make the right transaction later. So for me, that's just completely nonsensical. But it just shows it's a system of, for whatever reason, the infrastructure hasn't allowed that kind of innovation, and it happens across the board. First world, third world countries. There's impediments there, but once you do increase this these digital platforms for an industry or sector, it really unleashes a whole host of possible innovations, and it creates a lot of business opportunities at the end of the day, and prospects for jobs and new companies, which is exciting. Yes, some things may change. Technology can sometimes be seen as the baddie, but things need to change. It's inevitable, and it's not. Obviously, there's large corporates who are profit driven, but also, it's consumers. They get used to things, like Netflix. It works for people. It's affordable. It's flexible. It's on demand. It fits into people's lifestyles. So, I mean, they like that product, they're going to use it. And then that just means, you know, previous, you know, players in that kind of industry, obviously they need to change along with that, because this is how things go. As humans, there's always the bigger and the better, and we're looking to innovate and to create, which is what makes life so interesting a lot of the time. Although sometimes you just want to push pause, especially this year. I think there's been a bit of digital fatigue. Well, speaking from personal experience, that's how I feel anyway. Sometimes you just want to kick it back to old school and not look at a screen or anything, and actually just see someone face to face. But obviously, that's probably just it's obviously very specific to what we've had to deal with this year. But you know, digital is changed our way and changed our way of life and technology, and it's you know, it also democratizes a lot of things, and that's what's interesting in a lot of industries, also for property, in terms of access to finance and investments, etc. But yes, it was a bit of a tangent, but basically, you know, the digitization of the property industry, or at least elements of it, I think some of it will always remain traditional. BIM just offers a really exciting platform within the value chain, particularly operation, and it really gives a chance for the silos of this, for the wider built environment, from city planning, infrastructure planning, town planning, through to design and construction, and then that moves on to the transaction, operation, investment, you know, into the property sort of value chain. Like the BIM model can really carry from a city level. You know, London has just released a digital VR city map, which to aid in the planning process. So planners, developers can, you know, like sort of instantaneously see what's going on, and it's fed with live data about current planning applications, you know, construction activity. So it just makes so much more sense, you know, instead of dealing with these analog lists and perhaps spreadsheets, you've actually got a digital map that people can interact with, which is fantastic. So that BIM model could come from even a city level, and then a building is obviously in the design stage throughout everyone involved in that process, the architect, the engineers, the space planners, the QSs, you know, the fire safety consultants. I mean, it can really, if you're working with a BIM model, just makes that project really, really interesting, and drives efficiencies and innovation in how teams talk and, you know, create, which is not my expertise, but it also feeds into then construction technology, or Contech, which is another element of the wider sort of innovation in the built environment or the property industry. So it feeds into that, you know, during the construction process, massive opportunities, which a lot of my colleagues will obviously be speaking on and are very, very well versed. And then you pull that through to the operation. Like I said, I mean, you've got basically this track record, or this full service history, like a second-hand car, with this building that's been passed through from conceptual stage to a manufacturing, to an operation and trading stage. You've actually got this full history, which is really, really exciting. So yeah, just to sum up, you know, I hope I've explained in a way that makes sense, but it really excites me, like breaking down the silos, bringing that wider built environment value chain together, and then obviously within the area I operate in, and that I understand more closely within the property industry, that operation and property management, facilities management, asset management, through to transactions. I mean, it really is interesting. And then how that feeds back into the planning system when areas or buildings or blocks get redeveloped, you know, in a cityscape. It's really, really interesting. So I think the possibilities are endless, and I think we really need to wake up to BIM and its opportunity. And I think we need to start talking to each other a lot more from the public sector, in terms of the infrastructure and planning, etc., the architects, the contractors, the civil engineers, the landlords, the facilities managers, the transaction companies, the agents, etc. I think everyone should really start communicating and using these new digital tools as an excuse to open that conversation. And I think BIM Harambee is a fantastic platform and part of a wider movement from some fantastic organizations in Africa, and obviously feeding into the international counterparts, which is obviously all important these days. And I think it's fantastic, and it's great to see the conversation progressing as it is. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me, and I hope you're enjoying the conference and enjoy the rest of it. I will be contactable. My details will be available, and you can also reach out to me on the social medias, from LinkedIn to Twitter, and my business also recently created a Instagram account if that's your flavor. So, but my details will be available, and you're welcome to reach out to me with any queries. So with that, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and take care.